Death is inevitable. We all share the fear that sooner or later death will come for us, which makes it a great antagonist in movies, and there have been many classic and not so classic personifications over the years. But my favorite, and theoretically the most effective version of this, is death as a relentless non-corporeal force. This is a representation of death as it truly is, an inescapable existential threat. But film, visual medium that it is, has to find workarounds for personifying an abstract concept. For example, an amorphous blob of deadly energy, or, as is very common, a sinister wind. The version in It Follows changes form, so you can never be sure how death will take you, which is a lot like reality. And arguably the best is in Final Destination, where death ultimately takes the form of a series of complex Rube Goldberg machines. This death is not given form, but it is given purpose. Our natural fear of death turned into something that doesn't just wait for us, but something that hunts us.
Death is a scary, incomprehensible thing that we have no way of truly understanding. But that's not good enough, so we do what we always do with concepts too alien and abstract to comprehend. Slap a face on it. It's common in religion, fiction, and legend to personify death or have some figure act as an embodiment or agent of the concept. While often still a malevolent, impersonal being, it's also common to portray death as a human, sympathetic character. Chief among them, Discworld and the Book Thief, the latter putting death in a subversive position in that he is the one struggling to understand humanity, baffled by their equal capacity for beauty and cruelty. By making death a person who greets you at the end, one with a familiar shape and mind, it might not help us understand death per se, but helps us accept it, find comfort in it. It's an old friend you never knew you met, ushering you on with a hand on the shoulder.
Our media is littered with dead worlds. Two examples in video games come from Hollow Knight and Zelda the Wind Waker. While their respective settings at first bear little resemblance, they are both revealed to be built on the ruins of a once much greater, much stronger civilization. Hallownest appears a desolate wasteland but began as a utopian project to elevate the minds of all bugs, collapsing in large part due to the hubris of its king. Today, a vibrant archipelago, the Great Sea, was formed when supernatural forces flooded Hyrule to prevent evil from seizing power. What connects these two worlds is the reassurance that while the apocalyptic events at their core were tragic, life and community are returning. These lands are undergoing revival. Is it any wonder, really, that as our real-world leaders continue to fail us, as our sea levels continue to rise, we are obsessed with telling stories of hope after the end of the world? It may be the only way we can stand moving forward.
Death in games is boring. It's a setback that denotes failure, but it can be much more. Death can be used as a tool, both creatively and artistically. For some games it's a motivator, a way to push players forward, no matter the cost. Take a game like Post-Void and its timer-style health system. Some games incorporate death into their progression. In a game like Hades, death doesn't mean it's over, it means you progress elsewhere, like improving relationships or petting the Cerberus.
There's a good boy.
Some games revolve around death, building unique experiences. Return of the Obra Dinn is a game where you are surrounded by death, trying to piece together clues from various timelines to close a case. These examples are only a start, and there is still so much to explore. It's just a matter of taking the right tools to build the experience.
Let's say you're playing Super Mario Bros. You've got one life left, and you die. What happens next? Well, in Mario, it's this. There is nothing left. But sometimes, you get a zero guy. Sometimes it's not over yet. There's more beyond the veil. Jason Otis Continue explores this question of is it over yet by imagining the interior life of a video game character waiting to find out if the game will continue or if their essence will dissolve into meaningless bits. Your character uses the 10-second continue countdown to flee death, seek meaning, pray uncertainly, and cling desperately to memory because they have no control over whether you have another quarter. And that feels right to me because here we all are. We live our one life, we flee death, we seek meaning, we pray uncertainly, and we cling desperately to memory because we do not know, not one of us, what happens next.
They say it's a 1-minute essay about death, but I swear on my life I'm never gonna die and this video will go on forever. Defying death gets a bad rep. Seeking the cure to mortality is no more vain than seeking the cure to any other cancer. Y'all are just defeatist. Dr. Frankenstein screwed up one time and installed torches and pitchforks, but he did it. His social life needs work, but we need to separate the artist from their art and become as gods. We all see death as an irreparable condition that tortures the victim for all they've got before leaving a permanent phantom pain on their loved ones. But it doesn't have to be this huge tragedy. Stem cells will likely make organ replacement trivial in time. Resurrection is not off the table, yet it is commonly depicted as worse than dying. If the only hang-up with immortality is suicide, then death is exclusively consensual. I get that the monkey spot is classic fiction, but why would I ever leave the time loop? Sure, everybody and everything is fire murdered every 22 minutes, but I gotta look out for number 1. Why do you cry when Yoshi dies and not Mario? You're Mario. Everything's fine. If new beginnings are prevented by my time, I'd still rage against death, and I'll tell you why. Because 14 billion years times 0 is less than 22 minutes times 1. The video's ending, but you'll remember me. You cannot kill me in a way that matters, because I'm not fucking afraid of you!
ということでね、テクノポップなナンバー、Perfume のポリリズムを植木さんが歌うとどうなるか、植木ロイドでこのようになりました。お聴きください。
The song that you're currently listening to was recorded after its singer passed. Yamaha's vocaloid synthesizer created the vocals for this track using samples taken from the treasured Japanese entertainer Hitoshi Ueki and his eldest son after his death in 2007. The resulting voice bank, nicknamed Ueki-loid, was never released to the public outside of a few demo tracks for an album that was eventually cancelled. The existence of technology that can revive the voices of lost singers like Ueki bring to mind troubling questions in the digital age. What is the morality of using someone's image after they've passed? Is it right to imitate the dead with technology they couldn't possibly anticipate while they were alive? Though their voices can be brought back, their opinions often can only be guessed at.
It is said that we die twice. First when our bodies and minds expire, then again when we are last remembered. The inevitability of death is indeed troubling, and is the most influential driving force on mankind. The constant struggle between life and death is what pushes us to do amazing things. A great many scientific advances have been made allowing us to stay alive for increasing lengths of time. Simultaneously, we struggle to extend our lives past our physical deaths by creating great works and doing great deeds, with the hope that others will find some value in preserving our memories and creations, allowing us to live on indefinitely. Regarding this philosophy, it is important that we create the most amazing things that we can, and do the most wonderful deeds possible, so that the version of ourselves that is kept alive in memory is respected and worthy of preservation. In this way, death may be overcome.
Why do we, as a society, depict death as attractive? Not dying, but death as a personification. Like this guy from the game Hades. Why is he so hot? Why is there a literal romance path for death itself? Well, Death and the Maiden is an enduring motif, popularized in Renaissance art. The motif usually depicts a young maiden being seized by a personification of death, often represented in these motifs as a skeleton. But while this depiction links physical attraction with our demise, death itself isn't what's meant to be titillating. Though this guy has a really nice jawline. I suppose death is inevitable. We live with it, we're surrounded by it, until ultimately, We're enveloped by it. If it's gonna be there anyway, it may as well be sexy, right?
I am fully in favor of archiving media to preserve it in the best and most accessible form. Companies have a long history of failing to keep their intellectual property available. But what happens when a creator deliberately pulls their game out of circulation? Not to stash it away in the Disney vault and generate demand, but because they genuinely believe it's having a harmful impact. After Flappy Bird became a viral sensation in 2014, Don Gwen pulled it from app stores out of guilt for the people who had become addicted to his creation. It's tempting to write off anything along these lines as needless self-censorship, but what if somebody created a game that was intentionally designed with psychological traps to addict people, or advocated bigotry which they no longer agree with? Media certainly isn't incapable of causing harm, so if a creator fears that their work will do so, should we continue to preserve it? Even if it were possible to decide what should and shouldn't be left behind, it only takes one dedicated person to keep a work of art alive. We live in a world where anything released publicly will likely remain that way for the rest of our lives. The internet can be beautiful, terrifying, and completely uncontrollable.
Why was the first episode of Adventure Time about zombies? I think it might have something to do with what they represent. In George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, a swarm of ghouls acts as a threat to the social order, and the defeat of this invasive species restores it. In other words, by showing us what doesn't belong in a world, the storyteller also tells us about the world itself. In Slumber Party Panic, a horde of zombies attacks the Candy Kingdom after a failed science experiment. Princess Bubblegum puts Finn in charge of hiding the incoming undead from the Candy people, and he accepts because of his crush on her. This is the social order of Adventure Time. Princess Bubblegum rules the Candy Kingdom, and her main goal is keeping the Candy people safe, even if that means keeping information from them.
I hear something I don't understand, and it makes me scared!
Adventure Time is a show about friendship, love, and what it means to be a hero, and the first episode tells us all of that, with the help of the undead.
We've all heard life is brief, but in gaming, death is brief. At least, that's how it's supposed to be. I couldn't tell you about Dylan in 1,000 minutes, let alone one. He was a daredevil, an artist, jokester, animal lover, the bravest fighter I ever knew, and a hell of a gamer. Near the end, it got to the point where all he could do was respawn, go a few steps, and get shot. Respawn, go a few steps. You've heard if you die in the game, you die for real. Well, it turns out, if you're dying for real, that's all the game lets you do too.
The aggrieved, those left behind, are forced to confront and come to understand loss in a very intimate way. Yet this process is often accompanied by reframing and examining a life well lived, a life full of meaning in the memories of those who come after. But what does loss look like at the end of the world? Not the figurative civilizational collapse or neo-feudal reconstitution of pre-apocalyptic order, but the very last days of the human race. What meaning is there in the lives of those for whom no one will come after? What does loss mean when there is no one left to mourn? Whatever the answer may be, Chito and Yuri do not seem troubled by this stark reality. And this is because in the absence of civilization, they have each other. That whatever comes, they do not have to face the end alone. Perhaps this is enough.
Residual haunting, the belief that ghosts are an imprint of someone's final moments, popularised by Nigel Neal and his 1972 telefilm, The Stone Tape. It follows a group of researchers holed up in a remote castle who discover that the history of hauntings in the building stem from its walls and the stones beneath, which can record psychic impressions. In a repeated image, the spirit of a maid ascends a set of stairs. This superimposition is imperfect. Technological limitations mean that she jitters after she freezes. That agitated motion is an accidental expression of the idea behind residual haunting. For Neil, a ghost isn't a whimsical thing, or a vengeful and sentient spirit. It's a moment of pain, a human death stretched out across the ages.
What would your cat say if they saw you at your lowest? Seeking to answer that is Reconstruction Site, an album that explores death, grief, misery, and hope by Canadian indie rock band The Weakerthans. Framing the record are 3 sonnets that follow the relationship between a man succumbing to a terminal illness and his best friend who visits him in the hospital, resulting in a reflection on the way life is tragically cut short when a loved one dies. Other tracks include a fictional discussion between Michael Foucault and an explorer from the Arctic, as well as the last hurrah of a declining Elks Lodge, an old fraternal society. Standing above the rest is Plea from a cat named Virtute, the first in a series of songs spanning several albums. The song follows Virtute, a wayward cat, and her depressed, addicted owner. While the later songs observe how their relationship changes over time and is touched by death, Plea is a more upbeat track that sees Virtute attempting to cheer up her depressed owner and convince him of his own self-worth. I won't spoil the rest of the story, but this track and Reconstruction Site as a whole encompass a sad yet inspiring meditation on death, depression, and how we all have the power to overcome. In the words of Virtute herself,
I know you're strong.
Death is an inevitability. It may be years away, but the train of life is a one-way trip. We're all going to the same place. There's a fear of this lack of control that can fester in our minds, but what happens when the road to our end is too perilous, taking matters into our own hands? Lynn Ramsey's You Were Never Really Here explores this concept with a veteran on the verge of taking his own life from the immense suffering he faces. He feels alone, broken, his only feeling being pain brought on by this immense trauma. I don't like films with suicide. A Star is Born is a prime example, as it makes you an audience to what feels like an inevitable finale for our protagonist. I mean, it opens up with a literal noose in the first shot. However, Ramsey's thriller feels different, instead showing us this real debate that one man is battling with this conflict of staying and trying to help a hopeless world, or instead leaving. The titling of this film even recognizes this conflict, as sometimes you will see the good and it will feel like a beautiful day, but on our worst, when we feel empty, it can seem like...
It is neither child-rearing nor financial planning, but a strange creature called Odradek that is the central concern of the father who narrates Franz Kafka's short work, The Cares of a Family Man. Odradek is an impossible creature, resembling a spool of thread, but shaped like a star and with Urtsat's legs. At the text's end, the narrator wonders if this inorganic creature that haunts his home can possibly die, concluding that he likely cannot. He does no harm to anyone that one can see, but the idea that he is likely to survive me I find almost painful. But why is Odradek's survival so distressing? Because Odradek is useless. He has no aim in life, he is impossible to instrumentalize, he exists only to exist. Odradek is free from the concerns of the family man, labor, community, and the continuity of reproduction, and because of this he exists not only outside death, but also outside of our conception of life. He is distressing precisely because he suggests that maybe our understanding of the world has a few Odradek-shaped gaps that we cannot account for. Our current social organization cannot accommodate that which serves no purpose.
The last words of Albert Einstein were reportedly lost on his deathbed, because the only person to hear them was the attending nurse, who didn't understand German. When people tell that little factoid, they often present it as something tragic, implying we lost something profound or significant because of this particular nurse's linguistic shortcomings. Several cultures, but Western cultures in particular, place a lot of importance on someone's last words. Historically, this may have had something to do with the Christian idea of the last rites, which would include a final confession of sins before death. Nowadays, it probably has more to do with our tendency to view our own lives as a narrative. You may have heard of the term protagonist syndrome, which doesn't describe a real diagnosable syndrome, but rather the idea that many of us see ourselves as the protagonists of the narrative that is our life. It only makes sense then that we would want that narrative to end in a satisfying way. We would like someone's last words to serve as a nice wrap-up of their lives, a satisfying note to end on, or something that reframes the narrative of their life. In reality though, Einstein may well have used his last words to ask for clean sheets, or they might have been little more than feverish ramblings, so maybe we shouldn't put so much weight on last words. Life includes enough pressure already. Let's not put pressure on our deaths as well.